Pharaoh, who ruled the whole of Egypt for thousands of years. But now the Muslims were going to take away this Egypt forever in the Caliphate of Umar. This story is going to be very interesting because till date no one has explained it. The attack was carried out because shortly before the attack on Egypt, there was a great crisis in the Muslim Caliphate, a disease that had affected the Muslim army. 25,000 soldiers. Not only the soldiers, but all the major generals of the Muslims had also died of this disease, after which Caliph Umar himself went from Medina to the army of Muslims to control the situation, and there he met the new army chief of the Muslims, Ammar bin As, who put a new idea in front of Hazrat Umar, a new plan, that now we should slow down. Instead of going to Pharaoh's country, Egypt, Hazrat Umar was a little confused about this. Now such a large army of ours has been martyred by this disease, and it became very difficult to conquer Egypt with a small army, and Hazrat Umar was also in danger that it should not happen that the army of Muslims would go towards Egypt and attack them from behind. But Army Chief Ammar bin As stood firmly on his plan in front of Hazrat Umar. Even after all this, we must go to Egypt, because Ammar bin As was a very rich businessman from Mecca before he came to Islam, and his bar because of his business. I used to come and go to Egypt every time. Now he knew very well that the people of Egypt could never stand up to the Muslims. On being asked repeatedly, Hazrat Umar agreed to him and allowed him to attack Egypt, but on one condition, that you should go towards Egypt. But if I change my mind, then you will have to come back with your entire army. For 1,000 with the army of Hazrat Omar went towards the capital of Egypt at the same time. Ammar bin As moved towards Egypt and Hazrat Omar Medina. Hazrat Umar kept thinking only about Egypt, and as soon as Hazrat Umar reached Medina, all the elders called a meeting of the Sahaba and asked them about Egypt, that tell me what we should do. On which Hazrat Uthman and the rest of the Sahaba clearly said that we should stop the army going towards Egypt. After listening to everyone, Hazrat Umar finally decided and sent a letter to Ammar bin As, in which Hazrat Umar gave a clear order to his army chief that as soon as, if you get this letter from me, come back with your entire army. But if you have already crossed the border of Egypt, then take the name of Allah and move forward. As soon as this messenger of Hazrat Umar reached Ammar bin As, Muslims had already crossed the border of Egypt. But here is another angle of the story, that as soon as Hazrat Umar's messenger is immortal, the Muslims did not reach Egypt, but were just a short distance from the border of Egypt. But as soon as Ammar bin As saw the messenger of Hazrat Umar, he liked it. As soon as he understood what was written in this letter, he did not immediately open this letter, but first made the messenger sit down, fed him and asked him to rest a little. And as soon as the Muslims crossed this border, Army Chief Ammar bin As opened the letter of Caliph Umar and said that now it is too late. Now we have to move forward with this. The immortal bin As began to advance very fast with the entire army of Muslims, conquering all these areas and finally standing ready for war in front of the capital of Egypt, which would be called Cairo today. And it was not an ordinary city, but it was one of the most powerful cities in the world of that era. 600 for years, the Roman Empire was ruling, and no one could snatch the city from them. The army of Muslims came directly and put their tents in front of the city, and were absolutely ready for the war. Seeing that the Romans also raised their entire army in front of the Muslims, which included children, women, old people, so that by doing this, they would be afraid in the hearts of Muslims. But who was afraid of them? I don't think Muslims were so immortal. Bin As made them so big. Seeing the army, he sent one of his messengers to him and explained to him very well what you had to say. This messenger went straight and said in front of all the Romans that you know who we are now. Now your emperor has defeated every tomorrow badly. So now what will you do to us? Everyone was surprised to hear this, but the leader Cyrus said that the thing is right with this. The immortal bin As attacked the capital of Egypt with full force, but to no avail. For 1,000 it is impossible to conquer the capital of Egypt with the army of Egypt. For the next 7 months, Muslims sat in their camps in front of the city, and finally Army Chief Ammar bin As also understood that the time had come to ask Caliph Umar in Medina for help. He immediately 12,000 Hazrat Umar Zubair, may Allah be pleased with him, used to respect Hazrat Umar Zubair, may Allah be pleased with him, so much that he appointed 6 caliphs after his death. One of the people, Zubair bin Awam, was also nominated, which we will explain later. So now this new army also came and joined with Ammar bin-As in Egypt, and these two armies together made a new plan to attack in the style of Khalid bin Walid after a short time of war. The Muslims suddenly started withdrawing from the war and gradually came so far back from the battlefield that it seemed that now the Muslims finally lost this war. But at the same time, another army of Muslims came and stood behind the army of the Romans. Seeing this, Ammar bin-As ordered the attack again. In this way, the Muslims surrounded the army of the Romans from all sides and then crushed them. But even after all this, the Muslims could not enter the city. After all, one day Zubair bin Awam, may Allah be pleased with him, got fed up. He took a very bold decision and entered the city in the dark of night with only a few of his companions and went straight and opened the gate for the Muslims. The army entered the capital of Egypt and conquered the city and started looking for the government governor here. But it was too late for the governor to leave the city and flee to Alexandria, the most powerful city in Egypt. The now governor had fled, but the fear of Muslims had settled in his heart so much that he sent a letter to the Muslims as soon as he ran away from here that now more is it. Ammar bin-As rejected the governor's request because he knew that the Muslims would not be allowed to do so. The war was not with this governor, but with the emperor of the Roman Empire. The army chief Ammar bin-As accepted this offer of surrender of Egypt, but when the emperor of the Roman Empire, Heraclius, came to know of the surrender of his governor, he was very angry at the governor's intellect that what was his worth. He surrendered the whole of Egypt without asking me, after which he surrendered the whole Roman army, sent a message that leave the words of the governor and get ready for the last. War with the Muslims. The army chief of the Muslims, Ammar bin-As, also understood that now the Roman Empire. Now there is a very interesting story that when the Muslims were packing their belongings and tying their tents, Ammar bin Express Allah Anho also went to tie his tent. There he saw that a pigeon had set up his tent inside his tent. The nest has been built and the pigeon had children with it. So now Ammar bin-As has kept this tent here to save this pigeon's house. This tent is very important because in the coming time, every Muslim allowed this tent to remain here for a sign and started populating around this tent. In Arabic, the tent is called Fasta and later due to this pigeon's tent. The name of the capital of Egypt was Fust, which is the capital of Egypt to this day, and it is called Cairo. Let's come back to the story of the Romans. After some time, Muslims also reached the city and were absolutely surprised to see the city because Alexandria was a very big city named after Alexander the Great and Hazrat Umar in his entire caliphate. The BJP had never attacked a bigger city than this, which was much bigger than the city like Damak and Mudun. The Muslims reached here and tried very hard to conquer the city. But all the efforts of the Muslims failed completely, and the next 6 months, the Muslims sat helpless in front of the gates of the city, and in order to further break the morale of the Muslims, the Roman emperor prepared a huge army for war with the Muslims. Now it seemed that Caliph Omar would never be able to conquer Egypt and the army of Muslims from here. She will go back disappointed. But suddenly there was a big twist here, and the whole situation changed completely. Suddenly in the capital Tambol of the Roman Empire, the last powerful emperor of the great Roman Empire, Heraclius, 30 after the reign of the year, he died, after which his son came and took over the throne of his father. The Roman Empire had high hopes from this young emperor that he would definitely take away our lost power from the Muslims. But after staying on the throne for only a few days, the emperor's sleeping mother killed him and placed her son on the throne of the Roman Empire. Seeing this, the generals and people of the Roman Empire got very angry, after which a huge civil war started in the Roman Empire, after which the army that Heraclius had sent to fight the Muslims was forced to return. This civil war was so big that they just started killing each other. But when the situation was a little controlled, a new emperor sat on the throne of the Roman Empire. But the issue was that the age of this new emperor was only and only 11 the year was now when you tell me when at 11 if the boy of the year stands in front of Caliph Umar. Caliph Omar Razallah Ta'ala Anhu was watching the civil war of the Roman Empire from Medina very carefully, and he understood that this was the best time to conquer Egypt. So he immediately wrote a letter in Medina and ordered his messenger to deliver this letter to the army chief Ammar bin-As in Egypt at full speed. As soon as Amar Binas opened this letter from Egypt, Hazrat Umar had given a clear order that AMR should immediately gather the entire army of Muslims in one place and send this letter to them. Army Chief Amar Binas did exactly the same thing and gathered the entire army of Muslims and opened the letter of Hazrat Umar in front of them and said, "O Muslims, what has happened to you? You have been fighting for the last 2 years. Until now you have not been able to conquer Egypt. I am afraid that you have forgotten the ways of the Messenger of Allah and the Quran, and absolutely like our enemies, you have lost in the love of the world. Remember, Allah never helped such a people. So now, I am sending a new army to strengthen your hearts. So now come out of these old antics of yours and get up. Fix your horses. Take out your swords and get ready to fight one last battle with the Romans so that Muslims can bring Egypt under the control of Islam forever and ever." The Romans became completely helpless in the face of this attack and started fleeing everywhere except their walls, the gates' towers, and the Muslims finally entered the city when the governor of the city, Cyrus, said that, when he saw it all with his own eyes, he understood that there was 11 if the child of the year can never compete with Caliph Umar, then there is no use in fighting anymore. With this he picked up his pen and surrendered the whole of Egypt to the caliphate of Hazrat Umar, and in this way the country of Egypt came under the control of Muslims. The messenger reached Medina at full speed and headed to the Masjid-e-Nabawi instead of the house of Hazrat Umar. When Hazrat Umar came to know about this, he went straight to Masjid-Nabawi, and there this messenger told Hazrat Umar about the victory of Egypt. On hearing this, Hazrat Umar fell on the ground and thanked Allah by prostrating, and gathered the whole of Medina and told the story of the victory of Egypt in front of them. "Why did you go to Masjid Nabawi instead of my house?" That messenger said that I thought you would be sleeping. Then Hazrat Umar replied to him that if the caliph sleeps during the day, then who is such a big caliphate? Along with Egypt, there is another very powerful force in the hands of Amar bin As, because there was the largest port of the Roman Empire here. Then Army Chief Amar bin As immediately asked Caliph Umar for his permission that now the time had come for Muslims to form their first navy. But Hazrat Umar refused to do so because of seeing Arabs were always in the desert. They had no experience of seas and kayaks, and in comparison to them, the Romans were the champions of all this. So Hazrat Umar knew that we might be in the seas, unable to compete with the Romans and drowning all our army. Then Amar Binas left the idea of the navy and moved towards Africa and reached Libya-Thesia, but Algeria very fast. After all, Hazrat Umar sent a letter that now just do it. Our caliphate has spread too much. Then it is not allowed to go much further, after which Amar bin As returned to his new Egypt with a full army of Muslims. Capital came to Fust, and there he met some very strange people who told him that before he was overjoyed, he should know that every year the water of the riverine Nile, every year when the water of this river dries up, we throw a young virgin girl in this river, and only after the sacrifice of this girl, the water of the river starts flowing again. Then you Muslims will have to do the same. After this, the same thing happened, and the water of the riverine Nile almost dried up, due to which the Muslims started to panic a little that this river is really drying up, and finally the water of the river was so low that some people even started thinking whether we should also make such a sacrifice to drain the water of this river. Seeing all this, Amar bin As sent a letter to Hazrat Umar that now you decide what we should do. As soon as Hazrat Umar read this letter, he said that what is this? We came to this world so that we break all these old customs of the world. Immediately Hazrat Umar sent a letter and said that this letter should be put in the river Nile, in which it was written, "O water of the Nile, if you flow on your own free will for thousands of years till today, then stop. We do not need you. But if you flow by the will of Allah, then we pray to the same Allah that he will release your water again." After which the water of the river Nile started flowing even more than before. In this way, Hazrat Umar was not just an emperor, but was placing a new regime in front of the whole world. After the conquest of Egypt, the son of Anis beat an ordinary Egyptian with a stick over a small matter and tried to show that now we are your king and you are our slave. These Egyptians will be there. He could not say anything, but he had always heard a lot about the justice of Hazrat Umar. So he went straight from Egypt to Medina and went to Hazrat Umar and complained about the oppression committed against him in front of Hazrat Umar. Hazrat Umar was very sad to hear this, and he told the Egyptian that you should sit here and immediately sent a letter cover to Ammar bin As and ordered him to as these two fathers and sons reached Medina. They saw that all were sitting with Hazrat Umar, and at the same time the Egyptian Caliph Umar had taken them all. After killing the son, Caliph Umar said to the Egyptian that take the stick and hit his father Ammar bin As on the head too, because of his father's post, his son had killed you. He said to Ammar that since when did you start enslaving people when their mothers have created them free? Due to this tremendous justice, Hazrat Umar had now become the most powerful leader in the world. But soon after the conquest of Egypt, the king of the Parthian Empire was ready to take revenge on the Muslims by amassing a large army. H.